but I couldn't do it without him because I feel like it's wrong to only put out one side. So, here we go.
Okay, so the story is that we are getting divorced because it was our decision. It's my best friend. I still love her to death. Like, we still got a child together. We still gonna be hanging out. I'm probably
All
gonna
the
see
time.
it most days of the week, but at the end of the day, we got shit to do. That's it. You feel me? She has a path to go. I got a path to go, but our paths to pay her live. And we always gonna be next to each other.
Yeah.
And who's to say what's gonna happen in the future? All that we know is right now. Right now, it's the best. I mean, real talk, it's the best decision for both of us. For her to do what she needs to do, for me to do what I need to do. So
we can grow and heal and
that's it.
Elevate.
In July 2023, a vibrant young mother of two sent what would be her final text message. How did the lockout go? Can't make the Barbie movie today. See you at church tomorrow. Within hours, her life would end under circumstances that would leave her family searching for answers, fighting against a system that seemed determined to look the other way. April Holt was more than just another statistic. At 29, she had built a successful career as a lash technician in Nashville, Tennessee. Her magnetic personality and wisdom about life attracted over 200,000 followers on TikTok, where she shared messages of hope and empowerment. But on July 28, 2023, something happened that would transform her story from one of inspiration to one that would expose deep flaws in how law enforcement handles domestic cases. Before we continue with this powerful story, I want to invite you to join our True Crime Watch HD family. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to ensure you never miss our in-depth coverage of cases that deserve attention. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. April's life seemed picture-perfect on social media. Her videos radiated positivity, offering guidance and motivation to her followers. Be intentional, she would often say. Grow just a little bit. Progress over perfection. But beneath the carefully curated posts lay a reality that was starting to crack. 2 weeks before her death, April made a decision that would prove fateful. She filed for divorce from her husband, Donovan Holt. In her last TikTok video, she appeared alongside him, both maintaining a facade of amicable separation. He's my best friend, she said, smiling at the camera. We still have a child together. We'll always be in each other's lives. But those words would take on a chilling new meaning in light of what was about to unfold. What happened in the bathroom of their Nashville apartment that July morning? Why did investigators rush to label it a suicide despite glaring evidence to the contrary? And how did a mother's relentless pursuit of truth finally crack open a case that law enforcement had hastily closed? Think about this. How many other cases like April's have been mishandled, brushed aside, or wrongly classified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The events that unfolded that morning began with normalcy. April woke up early, as she always did, to write in her journal and set her intentions for the day. Her 7-year-old son, Denzel, was awake too. Neither could have known that these ordinary moments would be their last together. The timeline of what happened next would become crucial to understanding how a vibrant young mother's life was cut short, and how the system initially failed to serve justice. But it would take the unwavering determination of one person, April's mother, Jamie Dickerson, to uncover the truth that lay beneath the surface. That July morning unfurled like many others in the Nashville suburb. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware that within the walls of April and Donovan's apartment, tensions were escalating. The couple's voices, initially hushed, grew louder. Through the thin walls, fragments of their argument filtered out, but no one intervened. No one called the police. No one suspected that these moments would later become critical pieces of evidence in what would become a complex investigation. Denzel, their 7-year-old son, was in his room when the arguing intensified. Like many children caught in the crossfire of domestic discord, he tried to make himself invisible, but his senses remained alert. He would later become an unexpected witness, his testimony initially dismissed by authorities who seemed too eager to close the case. The timeline of that morning, pieced together through witness statements and later investigations, revealed a sequence of events that should have raised immediate red flags. Around mid-morning, the arguing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was something else entirely. Denzel, driven by instinct or curiosity, did something that no child should ever have to do. He lowered himself to the floor and peered under the bathroom door. What he saw would haunt him. His mother's feet, motionless on the tile floor. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, in a move that would later be scrutinized by investigators, Donovan emerged from the bathroom. His demeanor had shifted dramatically. Gone was the anger from earlier. Instead, he calmly approached his son, made him something to eat, and sat with him at the kitchen table. Then came the words that would echo through subsequent investigations. "Go check on your mom," a child, sent to discover what Donovan already knew. When Denzel reached the bathroom door, it was locked. He tried the handle again, and this time it opened. The scene that greeted him was beyond comprehension for a 7-year-old. His mother lay unresponsive, a plastic bag secured around her head with duct tape. In that moment, something inside him knew this wasn't right. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't what adults would later try to label as suicide. The 911 call that followed set in motion a chain of events that would expose troubling inadequacies in the justice system. Emergency responders arrived to find April still breathing, but barely. They rushed her to the hospital, where medical staff fought to save her life. But the damage had been done. 3 days later, on July 31st, 2023, April Holt was pronounced dead. What happened next would reveal how quickly crucial evidence can be overlooked when investigators rush to conclusions. The medical examiner's initial ruling came swiftly: suicide. It was a determination that seemed to ignore glaring inconsistencies. There were bruises on April's neck, marks on her ankles, broken blood vessels on her face, signs that told a different story than the one being officially recorded. Jamie Dickerson, April's mother, knew from the moment she saw her daughter in the hospital that something was terribly wrong. The bruises, the marks, the timing, none of it aligned with suicide. April had been making plans. She had texted about going to church the next day. She had been excited about her future, about the new chapter she was about to begin after filing for divorce. But the system moved quickly to close the case. Perhaps too quickly. The police seemed satisfied with Donovan's version of events. His story appeared neat, contained, and required minimal investigation. He had been taking care of their son, he said. He had found her in the bathroom. He had called for help. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Not for Jamie. In the days following April's death, peculiar details began to surface. Donovan's behavior at the hospital had struck many as odd. While Jamie collapsed in grief, he paced the corridors, offering strange, unprompted explanations about April's throat hurting that morning, about her not acting like herself. He handed over April's phone to Jamie, telling her to make all medical decisions, an unusual action for a husband still legally married to his wife. Then there was the matter of the wedding ring. In the week before April's death, Donovan had pawned his wedding band. A small detail, perhaps, but one that would later take on new significance. It was as if he had already begun dismantling the symbols of their marriage, even as April's divorce filing threatened to dismantle their legal union. The investigation's flaws became more apparent as time passed. The plastic bag, the alleged instrument of suicide, had never been properly tested for fingerprints. The bruises on April's body were documented but dismissed. Denzel's account of that morning, of hearing the argument, of seeing his mother's feet under the door, of being sent to find her, all of it was treated as peripheral information rather than crucial testimony. For Jamie, these weren't just oversights. They were pieces of a puzzle that the authorities seemed determined not to solve. But she knew her daughter. She knew that April, who had built a successful business, who had inspired hundreds of thousands with her messages of hope and resilience, who had been making plans for her future, would never have ended her life this way. She knew that April, who had finally found the courage to leave a troubled marriage, wouldn't have abandoned her children. The official narrative didn't just feel wrong. It felt impossible. April had been a beacon of light for others, using her platform to spread messages of faith and perseverance. Her TikTok videos showed a woman who understood life's challenges but faced them with unwavering optimism. "You want to know the hardest part about being a Christian?" she had asked in one of her last videos. "Not even being a Christian. Being an enlightened spiritual being is listening to your spirit over your loud-ass ego." Those words would take on new meaning as Jamie began her own journey, not just of grief, but of justice. She would need to listen to her own spirit, her own instincts, even as official voices tried to silence her. She would need to become not just a grieving mother, but an investigator, an advocate, and ultimately, the voice her daughter no longer had. The question wasn't just how April died anymore. It was why the system had failed her so completely. And more importantly, what would it take to uncover the truth that lay buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and hasty conclusions? As Jamie began her own investigation, she would discover that the path to justice isn't just about finding evidence. It's about having the courage to challenge a system that sometimes prefers convenient answers to uncomfortable truths. Jamie Dickerson transformed her grief into action. Each morning, she devoted hours to examining police reports, autopsy findings, and witness statements. The mother who once taught Sunday school became an amateur detective, driven by an unshakable belief that her daughter's story hadn't ended. It was merely waiting to be told. Her meticulous review of the medical examiner's report revealed disturbing inconsistencies. The official documents noted bruising on April's neck, thighs, and ankles, along with a significant gash on her inner thigh. Yet somehow, these injuries had been deemed irrelevant to the cause of death. The report contained a glaring contradiction. It documented clear signs of trauma while simultaneously claiming there were no signs of struggle. The timeline of April's final days painted a picture that contradicted the suicide narrative. She had been actively building her future, expanding her lash technician business, and sharing educational content with aspiring beauty professionals. Her social media presence remained consistently positive and forward-looking. Even her divorce filing, rather than a sign of desperation, represented a step toward independence and growth. Jamie's investigation took her down unexpected paths. She discovered that April and Donovan's relationship had been marked by patterns of control that weren't immediately visible to outsiders. While they presented themselves as best friends on social media, the reality was more complex. Donovan had exhibited obsessive behaviors during their previous separations, sometimes sleeping in April's car or outside her apartment when she tried to create distance. The most compelling evidence came from an unlikely source, the Community Review Board, a police advisory committee for Nashville. After months of persistent requests, Jamie received a 47-page report that contained a bombshell. The only fingerprints found on the plastic bag and duct tape belonged to Donovan. This crucial piece of evidence had been available to investigators from the beginning, yet somehow hadn't altered their conclusions. As Jamie dug deeper, she found herself facing unexpected obstacles. The same system she was trying to navigate began pushing back. A gag order was imposed, legally preventing her from speaking publicly about April's case. It was a clear attempt to silence her, but Jamie found creative ways to maintain pressure on the authorities. Each day, she posted a photo of herself with tape across her mouth, counting the days of enforced silence. The visual protest spoke volumes without violating the legal restrictions. Through it all, young Denzel carried the weight of what he had witnessed. His account remained consistent. The argument he had heard, the silence that followed, his father's strange calmness, and the directive to check on his mother. Child psychologists who later reviewed his statements noted their reliability. Children rarely maintain consistent false narratives over extended periods. The custody battle that ensued added another layer of complexity to the case. Despite the mounting evidence and ongoing investigation, the courts initially granted shared custody to Donovan. It was a decision that forced Jamie to hand her grandson over to the very person she suspected of ending her daughter's life. The psychological impact on Denzel was profound, yet the system seemed blind to the potential dangers. Jamie's breakthrough came through an unexpected strategy. Armed with the forensic report showing Donovan's fingerprints on the evidence, she confronted him directly. It was a bold move, born of frustration with the official investigation's pace. She presented him with a choice: tell the truth or face a renewed investigation by the cold case unit. The response she received would change everything. Donovan, perhaps feeling the weight of the evidence against him, began to talk. The confession started slowly, then poured out in detail. The argument, the struggle, the moment of violence that ended April's life. He described how he had staged the scene, placing the bag over her head and securing it with tape to create the appearance of suicide. Then, in an act that demonstrated calculated cruelty, he sent his own son to discover the aftermath. The confession validated what Jamie had known all along, but it also raised troubling questions about the initial investigation. How had so many red flags been ignored? Why had investigators accepted the suicide narrative despite physical evidence suggesting otherwise? And most importantly, how many other cases had been closed prematurely, leaving families without answers or justice? The case was reopened, and this time, investigators couldn't ignore the evidence. The medical examiner reviewed the autopsy findings anew, and the cause of death was officially changed from suicide to homicide. It was a victory for truth, but it came at a tremendous cost. Countless hours of investigation, emotional trauma, and a year of watching her daughter's alleged killer walk free. In September 2024, Donovan Holt was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, where he had fled in an apparent attempt to start a new life. The charges, reckless homicide, evidence tampering, and false reporting, seemed inadequate to many who had followed the case. For Jamie, they represented just the beginning of her fight for justice. She continued to push for upgraded charges that would better reflect the calculated nature of the crime. The story of April Holt and her mother's quest for justice exposed critical flaws in how domestic cases are handled. It demonstrated the vital importance of listening to children's testimonies and the danger of rushing to conclusions in death investigations. But perhaps most importantly, it showed the power of a mother's love and determination in the face of institutional resistance. The ripple effects of April's case extended far beyond the courtroom. It sparked crucial conversations about how law enforcement handles domestic cases and the importance of thorough death investigations. The hasty classification of her death as suicide highlighted a troubling pattern, one where convenient conclusions often trumped careful investigation. April's story resonated deeply within the Nashville community and beyond. Her TikTok followers, who had once tuned in for her messages of hope and empowerment, now became advocates for justice. They shared her story, amplified Jamie's voice during the gag order, and demonstrated how social media could be used as a tool for accountability. The evidence that emerged painted a portrait of premeditation that contradicted the initial charges. In the weeks leading up to April's death, there were warning signs that investigators had originally overlooked. Donovan's pawning of his wedding ring, his reaction to the divorce filing, and his documented history of obsessive behavior formed a pattern that should have warranted closer scrutiny. If you've been following this story and believe in the importance of thorough investigations in cases like April's, please take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Watch HD. Your support helps us continue bringing attention to cases that might otherwise go unnoticed. Together, we can make a difference in how these stories are told and how justice is served. The psychological impact on April's children became increasingly apparent as the case unfolded. Her daughter, Serenity, at 12 years old, showed remarkable courage by writing a letter to the district attorney, pleading for justice. The letter revealed the profound understanding children often have of situations adults try to shield them from. Meanwhile, Denzel, who had witnessed the tragic events firsthand, demonstrated resilience even as he processed trauma no child should endure. Together, April's children started a project called Hugs from Heaven, collecting and distributing blankets to those in need. The initiative embodied their mother's spirit of giving and her belief in practical expressions of love. Each blanket carried a tag with April's favorite saying, "Progress over perfection." The project became a way for them to transform their pain into purpose, much as their mother had done through her social media presence. Jamie's fight extended beyond just securing an arrest. She recognized that the system's failures in April's case weren't isolated incidents. In response, she began working to establish the Grieve With Me Center, a support facility designed to help families navigating similar situations. The center would offer grief counseling, resources for families challenging official narratives, and support groups for children affected by domestic violence. The legal proceedings revealed troubling aspects of how domestic cases are handled in the justice system. Despite Donovan's confession and the overwhelming evidence of staging, the initial charges seemed to minimize the calculated nature of his actions. The classification of reckless homicide suggested an unplanned act, while the evidence pointed to something far more deliberate. Jamie's campaign to upgrade the charges to first-degree murder gained momentum as more details emerged. The premeditation became clear. The timing immediately after the divorce filing, the careful staging of the scene, the manipulation of evidence, and perhaps most chillingly, the calculated decision to have his own son discover the scene. The case exposed how crucial proper evidence collection and analysis are in the initial stages of an investigation. The fingerprints on the plastic bag and duct tape, evidence that had been available from the beginning, might have changed the entire trajectory of the case had they been properly analyzed immediately. Instead, it took a mother's relentless pursuit of truth to bring this evidence to light. Mental health professionals who reviewed the case noted how April's public persona on social media might have actually worked against her in the initial investigation. Her final video with Donovan, where they discussed their upcoming divorce in apparently amicable terms, was taken at face value. Investigators failed to look beneath the surface to question whether this presentation matched the private reality of their relationship. The community's response to the case demonstrated the power of collective action. When Jamie was silenced by the gag order, supporters found creative ways to keep April's story in the public eye. They shared daily posts, created awareness campaigns, and maintained pressure on local authorities to revisit the case. This grassroots movement showed how public attention could influence the justice system's response to domestic violence cases. As the case moved toward trial, Jamie's advocacy expanded. She began working with legislators to draft new laws that would require more thorough investigations in cases initially ruled as suicides, especially when domestic violence might be involved. These efforts, dubbed April's Law, aimed to prevent other families from facing the same uphill battle for truth and justice. The psychological aspects of the case, particularly Donovan's behavior before and after April's death, became a subject of study for experts in domestic violence. His ability to maintain a calm facade, to participate in social media videos discussing their divorce, and to manipulate the initial investigation highlighted the complexity of domestic abuse cases and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. As the legal proceedings continued, Jamie's fight for justice evolved into something larger than her daughter's case. It became a movement to change how domestic violence cases are handled, how death investigations are conducted, and how families seeking truth are treated by the justice system. The impact of April Holt's case extended far beyond the confines of Nashville's criminal justice system. Jamie Dickerson's relentless pursuit of truth became a beacon for other families caught in similar situations, demonstrating how determination and methodical investigation could overcome institutional inertia. In the wake of Donovan's arrest, Jamie began receiving messages from across the country. Other families shared stories of suspicious deaths labeled as suicides, of evidence overlooked, of children's testimonies dismissed. A pattern emerged, one that suggested April's case wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader systemic issue in how domestic violence cases are investigated. Jamie's advocacy work took on new dimensions. She began documenting the process of investigating a suspicious death, creating resources for other families facing similar battles. Her experience highlighted critical steps often overlooked in the immediate aftermath of tragedy: photographing injuries, securing electronic devices, recording witness statements while memories were fresh. The case also exposed how social media can create misleading narratives. April and Donovan's final TikTok video, where they discussed their impending divorce with apparent amicability, demonstrated how public personas could mask private turmoil. It raised important questions about the intersection of social media authenticity and domestic violence, showing how abusers often manipulate public perception to maintain control. Legal experts studying the case identified several critical junctures where different protocols might have changed the outcome. The initial police response, the medical examiner's preliminary findings, the handling of physical evidence, each represented a moment where more thorough investigation could have revealed the truth sooner. These insights led to proposals for new protocols in handling domestic death investigations. April's influence continued even after her death. Her TikTok videos, which once offered daily inspiration to hundreds of thousands, became something different: a digital legacy that captured her essence and wisdom. Followers shared how her messages had impacted their lives, how her emphasis on personal growth and faith had helped them through their own challenges. Her words about listening to one's spirit over ego took on prophetic significance, particularly in light of how her mother's intuition had ultimately unveiled the truth. The legal proceedings following Donovan's arrest revealed additional layers of complexity. Prosecutors faced the challenge of explaining why a man who had allegedly staged his wife's death as a suicide would also create a seemingly amicable TikTok video about their divorce. The case highlighted how domestic violence often operates beneath a carefully maintained facade of normalcy. The ripple effects of April's case touched various aspects of the criminal justice system. Medical examiners began reviewing their protocols for suicide determinations. Police departments reassessed their initial response procedures. Domestic violence advocates incorporated the case into their training materials, using it to illustrate how abusers can manipulate both personal relationships and official investigations. Throughout it all, Jamie remained focused on ensuring that April's death would lead to meaningful change. She often recalled her daughter's words about being intentional, about making every day count. In fighting for justice, in supporting her grandchildren, in helping other families navigate similar tragedies, she embodied that intentionality. The system that had initially failed April became the catalyst for reform, driven by a mother's unwavering dedication to truth and justice. The story of April Holt transcended the typical true crime narrative. It became a testament to maternal love, to the power of persistence, and to the importance of questioning official narratives when instinct suggests something isn't right. It showed how tragedy could spark transformation, how one family's fight for truth could illuminate the path for others facing similar battles.